Hello, I think this is working. Yeah. Okay. So on Sunday, I did a video or a live stream where we talked about the eighth season, which is down here. And when I talked about this, someone had an excellent question, which was why is the eighth season? And I answered that question, but as I was talking, my answer just fell off. Like I was just going from the hip and I was talking about it the way it had made sense to me in the past. Like as I was talking, something about my answer just felt off and I felt like I was kind of fumbling around and it didn't feel right. And if in the moment I had been more, I guess, virtuous, I think what I would have answered is I'm not sure. I need to think about that. Um, but I didn't. I just started talking, and then when it fell off, instead of like when it fell off, it was so important to me to feel like I'm an expert on this topic that I just started fumbling and mumbling instead of actually admitting that I'm not sure. Um, and it wasn't until after the live stream got over, I felt kind of off inside myself, and I did some reflection, and it just felt like it would be helpful to me. It may be helpful to you if I address this. So, first of all, my experience I had trying to answer that question was a great opportunity to apply some of these principles of the eighth season. Be aware of schema. Brandon had a question that was really probably outside my current schema in some ways. I had never really taken the time to build a schema around the idea of why isn't the eighth season sooner. Um, I never fully thought that I hadn't taken time to think that through. And so when he asked me, it was an opportunity to adjust my schema, um, and to be open-minded. But I was being closed-minded in the sense that I felt like I had to already have the answer because I felt like I'm supposed to be an expert. And so I wasn't letting myself just be kind of open-minded and and whatnot. And I wasn't And as I talked, I discovered that my ideas that I was saying didn't make sense, which was a chance to test my ideas and figure out that something was off. And now I'm taking the initiative to learn. I'm taking the initiative to get a better answer to that question. And it's important for me to be accountable for my schema. One of the ways I can be accountable for my schema is to say I don't know, which I didn't do, but I'm doing that now. And finally, articulating your schema is really important. Um, in that by articulating my schema in this instance, I discovered that my schema was lacking, which is really good chance for me to learn. Also, applying effort, I could have just moved on and just been like, meh, but instead I'm choosing to apply effort to correcting this and to getting this right. I'm putting the effort in it takes to get the understanding. I've been thinking about this more, and in trying to do this in an open-minded way, I'm going to try to address the question better now. Um, so I think that when we talk about, so there's two ways to organize the virtues. One is to organize them from 1 to 13, like they're organized right here, right here. And another way, well, actually, there's sort of three ways. Another way is to organize them from 13 to 1. There's merit in going both directions. Also, we can organize them in a shape like this. We can organize them in the shape of Metatron's cube. And all three ways teach us different things. Now, why is the eighth season the eighth one? Well, as I've thought about it more, one very simple answer is that that's the time of year that's best to practice this. If you live in the southern hemisphere, the virtue seasons are actually reversed, in the sense that the opposite times of year. So, increased understanding is a season that happens during the winter. But if you're in the southern hemisphere, it still happens in the winter. But since in the southern hemisphere, the winter happens the opposite time of year, in the southern hemisphere, like if you live on Australia, for example, increased understanding is going to happen in the opposite time of year so that it's still in the winter. So like in that hemisphere right now, in the southern hemisphere, as I'm speaking, what I'm saying doesn't apply to them as much because they're not in the increased understanding season right now. I haven't done the math haven't had to teach anyone this in the Southern Hemisphere, so I'm going to be open about the fact that I haven't done the math to figure out exactly where they would land. But I'm pretty sure that right now would probably be the fifth season. So I think that each of these it's opposite, right? So in the Southern Hemisphere, when it's the eighth season in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the fifth season in the Southern Hemisphere. That's what this chart can teach us that, right? When it's the first season in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the 12th season in the Southern Hemisphere. So they work opposite from each other. And the 13th season, I think, stays in the same spot. I haven't fully tested that yet, so you can test that idea and tell me if you learn more about it. But that's what seems to be the case. Um, so I think one of the reasons why the eighth season comes as number eight is because this is the time of year that's a great time for folks on understanding, largely because it's winter, probably, right? Like outside, it's not, we've gotten through the harvest time, and now it's time when we can kind of relax. Like if you're living like in a farming society, which most of humanity has done, now is the time when you can relax more and focus on learning. If you notice it, the summer seasons, like the warm weather seasons, are seasons 1 through 6 or so, maybe seven a little bit. Seven starts transition, and those seasons all are very active and kind of outward, right? So like fulfill your unity, you're like out getting your unity fulfilled. You're working on agency, you're doing things, you're communicating with others, you're healing people, you're working on your emotions, and emotions are energy. They're very energetic, and action is totally like something you do outward. So when the weather's warm, those are the good things to do. But then as the weather gets cool, it's time to go more inward and stay motivated, increase understanding, hone our perception, discern truth, know ourselves. And then love, when we get to love, we start to move towards the warm weather again. And then, steward the earth, the weather gets really warm. And what sort of happens in spring on purpose because, everything's coming forth, right? Everything comes to full fruition and full fruit. Um, I think a good answer to the question Brandon had is that the eighth season is where it is in the season order because that's a good time of year to do it. Now, there's a few other ways to look at this though. And if you look at the seasons this way, we start at 1 and go down towards 8, right? And that's great. But you can also start at the bottom and go up. So my experience has been that when you're in a redemptive process, so when you're going through a process where you're trying to help yourself or others grow, grow towards redemption, like return to a state of oneness with everything, it tends to work well to stay, to go from 1 to 12. It's not always the case. That's just kind of a general pattern. But when you're in a fall process, when you're going from being one with everything and learning to become an individual, and we go through these cycles. We go from being one with everything to be individual to back to being one with everything again, right? This happens with like if you look at the story of Adam and Eve, they're one with everything, they fall, so they go to the process of becoming an individual. Then we learn from being an individual, and then as we move towards the end of the world, we move back towards being one again. Which anyone that's talking about the millennium or age of Aquarius, or the golden age that's coming, the ascension of the earth, all of these things are talking about this. We're moving towards this age of oneness now. So we're in a phase right now where we're moving, 1 towards 12. But when we're first born, we move more 12 towards 1 because when you're born, you're becoming an individual. So when babies are first born, they just are love. That's all they are. They just there's everything just is, and they just love, and that's all there is because they're one with everything. So they don't see themselves as an individual. Babies don't yet. They haven't entered the mirror phase where they start to notice that they are separate from everything else. Everything just is, and they just love is all there is. Then they start to know themselves and discern themselves as an individual. And then as they do that, they can discern truth because they can think different. They can see themselves as separate from other things. So then they can start to say that is truth, that is, instead of just kind of being. And then they can start to perceive, they can start to develop perceptions and to notice the things that are. And then as they start to notice things, they can develop schema around them. And then, that motivates them to do actions. And as they do actions, they have interactions with things that create emotional responses. And some of those emotions are painful, so they need to be able to fix the things that come apart. And then they eventually learn to communicate. And then once they can communicate, they can start like really interacting with the world, which means they can do agency, right? And then they can start fulfilling their unity. So like babies go that way, but when we're going once